Hey everybody, welcome back to Sip&Talk. I'm Joe. And as always, I'm ready to dive into some seriously juicy info with you all today. It's like we're mixing up a knowledge cocktail here. Strong stuff, but oh, so smooth going down.
And I'm Sunny, your friendly neighborhood fact checker. I'll make sure we get all the ingredients right. Speaking of mixing things up, you know what's always a good blend? Travel whiskey and discovering awesome new things. You have to check out our friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickytolife.
Yeah, Mickey's the best. He's always got something cool going on. Welcome back to Sip&Talk.
Welcome. We have a really heavy topic on the table today.
We do, but we're going to handle it the way we always do, right? We dismantle the anxiety and just get straight to the fact. I want to start with something I watched recently. It was a U.S. congressional hearing from last month. Yeah, and they were talking about U.S.-China competition, the whole situation in the Taiwan Strait, and, you know, how much strategic patience American officials really think they have left.
And what was the vibe?
Honestly, the level of internal U.S. worry, it's just so much deeper than I think the general public realizes. It felt like they were talking about a clock that was kicking down and the face was already cracked.
That feeling of anxiety in Washington is, it's being perfectly mirrored by a rising crisis of confidence in Taipei. You see it everywhere, in their political discourse, in the polling. People in Taiwan are increasingly asking, can the U.S., and more importantly, will the U.S. stand with them when the moment of truth arrives?
And it's not just a feeling, right? It's driven by actual policy.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about specific policy actions, military aid delays, and this whole strategic ambiguity thing that, frankly, is starting to feel a lot more like strategic negligence.
And that's exactly what we have to get into today. We're tackling a question that, on the surface, it sounds really dramatic, maybe even like hyperbole.
Right.
But it's actually deeply, deeply fact-based.
Yeah.
And the question is, why would Chinese control of Taiwan be utterly destructive for the U.S. and, honestly, for the entire world?
We really need to be clear here. Destructive is not emotional language. It's not an exaggeration.
Right.
Taiwan is so much more than just a geopolitical flashpoint. It is a global core hub.
A core hub. I like that phrase.
Yeah, think of it as the ultimate intersection. It's the technology nexus. It's the economic foundation for critical supply chains. It's a huge geopolitical linchpin and a key node in the democratic world order.
So if you put everything on one map.
Everything. You put ships, supply chains, military strategy, shipping lanes, democracy. You put it all on one map, and Taiwan is the foundation that everything else is built on. And if that foundation cracks,
the whole building falls.
The whole thing comes down.
So our mission today is to just systematically dismantle this layer by layer. We're going to look at the U.S. strategic shifts, the global political ramifications, the literal breakdown of tech supply chains.
And that internal shift in Taiwan's own confidence.
Exactly. We want you to walk away from this understanding why this isn't just some far-off issue in Asia. This is something that could impact your retirement fund, your national defense, maybe even your basic digital life.
And for our final thought, we're going to speculate on a truly frightening vision. What does a completely unconstrained global Chinese Communist Party superpower actually look like if this red line is crossed?
It's a crucial discussion. So get comfortable, because this deep dive is definitely going to challenge your perspective on what Taiwan actually means for global stability.
All right, let's get into it. Let's start with the mechanics of that anxiety and why Taiwan itself is starting to feel so isolated.
So we've established this anxiety in Washington is mirrored in Taipei. You said it's driven by specific policy actions. Let's start with, I think, the most frustrating one. How the U.S. is treating Taiwan economically, even while we're so incredibly reliant on their technology.
It's the ultimate contradiction, isn't it? How do you treat an ally, especially an ally that is, and this is not an exaggeration, the single most critical partner for the entire global semiconductor industry?
Yeah, you definitely don't treat them like a trade rival.
And yet, that's exactly the signal the U.S. has been sending through tariffs.
Right. These high taxes on Taiwanese imports. Can you give us the numbers? Because they're pretty staggering when you put them next to other partners.
They are. So initially, there was a threat to impose tariffs at an astronomical 32% on some Taiwanese imports.
32%.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Now, that was negotiated down, but the current rate is still sitting around 20%.
Okay. And why is that number so important?
Well, because other core U.S. allies in the region, Japan, South Korea, they're subject to much lower tariffs. closer to 15% or even less. So if you're Taiwan and you're facing this existential military threat every single day,
and your supposed protector is hitting you with higher taxes than Japan,
what's the message? The clear message is that your security partnership takes a backseat to trade protectionism.
It just makes them feel like a transactional tool, not a real partner.
Exactly.
And this transactional feeling, it gets even worse when you look at the pressure the U.S. is applying at the same time, specifically on TSMC.
Right, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. The U.S. demands are just massive. They are essentially forcing TSMC, which is a private Taiwanese company, mind you, to build these hugely expensive multi-billion-dollar fabrication plants.
Like that massive one they're building in Arizona.
Exactly. And this is incredibly complex, it's incredibly expensive, and it involves transferring key technological know-how and manpower to U.S. soil.
And this is where that feeling of extraction comes in, which is how some analysts have described it.
It absolutely is. I mean, just imagine this. You're being forced to invest billions into the U.S. economy, essentially subsidizing American domestic chip security, and you're transferring your crown jewels, your technological edge, while the U.S. is simultaneously penalizing your other exports with tariffs.
Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow.
The feeling among the Taiwanese public and in their political class is, we conceded to the demand to move our manufacturing, and now they're just demanding more. They feel like they're being exploited for their tech and then taxed for everything else.
It just reinforces that fear that the U.S. is more interested in its own economic security than Taiwan's actual physical safety.
It does. And that economic pressure point flows directly into the military sphere, which is, of course, even more sensitive because the threat from Beijing is constant and it's rising.
Let's talk about that. The military aid uncertainty. This really drives home that feeling of a transactional alliance.
This is where politics and security get tangled up in a really dangerous way. We saw a perfect, if disturbing, example of this recently. The reported delay, or even outright rejection, of a pretty significant $400 million military package.
And we're not talking about fancy futuristic stuff here.
No, not at all. We're talking about basic necessities. Drones, critical ammunition, the stuff you need for immediate defense, not some fighter jet that'll arrive in 10 years.
And the reason for the delay, according to the reports, it wasn't technical?
No. It was strongly suggested that Taiwan was being used as leverage, a bargaining chip.
A chip in the U.S.'s high-stakes trade talks with Beijing.
That is the very definition of transactional. When a close partner's immediate defense needs, drones and ammo, are contingent on trade outcomes with your main adversary, it just completely destroys trust.
So did it ever go through?
Well, the U.S. eventually pushed through a smaller sale of spare parts, which, is necessary, but it's not transformative. But the damage was already done.
It confirmed their worst fear.
It confirmed their deepest, darkest fear in Taipei, that Taiwan's security is secondary to U.S. domestic or global economic maneuvering.
And it's not just the delays, is it? It's also about the quality and the suitability of the weapons being delivered.
That's a huge part of it. Taiwan has purchased multi-billion-dollar weapons systems from the U.S. in the past, systems that are years overdue.
Or when they finally get there.
They're found to be ill-suited for the kind of asymmetric porcupine defense that Taiwan actually needs to implement. It's really hard to fight a high-tech naval invasion with outdated or oversized platforms that were designed for a totally different kind of war.
Right. And all of this, this slow walking the quality issues, it makes that U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity feel, well, not so strategic.
It feels catastrophic. Ambiguity is supposed to deter China while also keeping Taiwan from provoking a conflict. But when the U.S. fails to deliver credible, timely defense capabilities, especially when China is ramping up its military every day,
then ambiguity doesn't feel strategic anymore.
It feels like abandonment waiting to happen. It forces Taipei to ask, are we being equipped for defense, or are we being set up as a sacrificial lamb?
And the Taiwanese public is watching all of this unfold. This isn't just a few elites reading policy papers.
No. The shift in public opinion is palpable. The numbers are just stark. A major 2025 Brookings Institution report highlighted this collapse in confidence.
What were the numbers?
60.9% of Taiwanese surveyed actively disagreed that U.S. policy, particularly under the current administration, was making Taiwan safer.
Wait, over 60%?
60.9%.
That's a massive shift.
Yeah.
What was the driving force behind that drop? Was there a specific moment?
I think it was a cumulative effect, but the rhetoric around the arms sales was a key part of it. When the U.S. kept delaying critical, immediate needs, drones, missiles, and then offered systems that were decades old or just totally unsuitable. It led to these op-eds in Taiwan using extremely harsh language, and that's where you saw this analogy emerge of the U.S. relationship being like an abusive partner.
Wow, that's strong language.
It is. A partner that demands concessions, exploits your resources, and then leaves you vulnerable to a real threat. It's a reflection of feeling exploited and at the same time completely unsafe.
And that level of public despair is what leads to really dangerous internal shifts.
Exactly.
Because if the public and the political establishment believe the U.S. is unreliable, the incentive grows to reevaluate the whole cross-strait relationship, to try and accommodate Beijing before they're just sacrificed in a bigger power game.
It's a survival mechanism, but it's one that completely undermines the U.S. strategic position. And that's why this trust deficit is so critical. If Taiwan loses faith in its protector, it just accelerates the very outcome that everyone is trying to avoid.
Okay, so we've established the massive trust fracture. Now let's pivot and explain why that fracture matters to literally every single person listening, whether you run a bakery in London or manage a hedge fund in New York.
Yes. Now we get into the true gravity of the situation, the $10 trillion catastrophe.
We're going to break this down into 3 existential threats, right? Economic, geostrategic, and values.
We have to. Because if you only focus on one, you miss the systemic nature of the risk. Taiwan isn't a single domino. It's the entire base layer of the pyramid.
Let's start with the most immediate, the most measurable, and frankly, the most universally terrifying threat, the chip apocalypse.
This is where Taiwan's global monopoly becomes a strategic vulnerability for everyone else. So Taiwan manufactures over 60% of global semiconductors. That's impressive on its own.
But that's not the scariest number.
No. The truly frightening statistic is their dominance in the bleeding-edge technology. They control over 90% of the world's most advanced logic chips, primarily through TSMC.
90%? That's not just market dominance. That's a single point of failure for the entire digital world.
It really is. It's like having one single valve that controls 90% of the world's oxygen supply.
And these chips are the digital oxygen for, well, everything.
Everything. Think about it. They power every new iPhone, every global AI data center, every 5G and 6G infrastructure project. But crucially, they power advanced U.S. defense systems.
High-precision targeting systems in F-35s.
Advanced cruise missiles, satellite communications. The reliance is total.
So if China controls Taiwan, or if a conflict, even a short one, causes production to just stop, what is the immediate effect? It's not a slowdown, it's a global seizure.
The analogy we've been using is like losing all gasoline for all modern vehicles worldwide overnight. Everything just stops.
And the economic collapse would be instantaneous and exponential. Let's dig into the numbers here. Ken Griffin, the founder of Citadel, he warned that losing access to Taiwanese chips could cause U.S. GDP to drop by what, 8 to 10%?
8 to 10%. That is a generational economic shock.
Okay, so let's talk about the $10 trillion figure from Bloomberg. That's 10% of global GDP. People hear these huge numbers, but it's hard to grasp the magnitude. Why does a chip shortage cause that severe of a meltdown?
Because the ripple effects are catastrophic and they're immediate. It's not just that your new phone is delayed. First, specialized industries, automotive, medical devices, high-end electronics, they instantly lose components. Production halts globally.
Okay.
Second, and this is more damaging, the cost of rebuilding these incredibly complex supply chains outside of Taiwan, assuming that's even technologically possible in the short term, is astronomical. It would take 5 to 10 years and hundreds of billions of dollars just to start approaching Taiwan's capacity.
And during that decade,
global productivity, innovation, defense capabilities, they all freeze. So a $10 trillion loss isn't just lost income, it's the cost of a decade of economic stagnation and the complete erosion of any competitive advantage.
You said this shock is projected to be bigger than the 2008 financial crisis and the COVID pandemic?
Combined, it truly rivals the Great Depression in its potential severity.
That is a terrifying concept. It leads us directly to the second pillar, the geostrategic threat. And this is all about location, location, location.
Exactly. Taiwan is the definitive anchor point of the first island chain.
Now, for listeners who know this, the chain runs from Japan down through the Ryukyus, Taiwan, the Philippines. We know what it is.
Right, but what's important is the implication. This chain has been the U.S. strategic defense line since World War II. It's designed to contain continental power and secure free passage into the Pacific.
And if China controls Taiwan, they don't just pierce the center of that line.
They permanently establish themselves in the middle of the Pacific. They gain what military strategists call an unsinkable aircraft carrier. It immediately gives the Chinese Navy and Air Force free access into the blue water of the Western Pacific. This isn't just about controlling the strait. It's about controlling critical sea lanes and projecting power far beyond their immediate shores.
So they're essentially moving their whole strategic perimeter thousands of miles east.
That's it. And this new reach directly threatens key U.S. forward bases like Guam, which is a foundational hub for U.S. Pacific defense. It fundamentally pushes the threat envelope toward Hawaii and maybe even the U.S. West Coast.
So the entire U.S. defense posture, which has dominated the Pacific for 75 years.
It would be instantly broken and forced to retreat thousands of miles. The cost of maintaining U.S. security would skyrocket, and the time for intervention would just vanish.
And that catastrophic retreat leads directly to the third element, the end of the Indo-Pacific order.
The loss of Taiwan would be a total undeniable failure of the U.S. security commitment in Asia. Think about our allies, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia.
The U.S. can't prevent this.
Their faith in American reliability collapses instantly. They'll be forced, purely for self-preservation, to start aligning their foreign and economic policies with Beijing. And that's it. That's the end of U.S. regional hegemony. The entire rules-based, U.S.-led security order in the Indo-Pacific would be rewritten on Beijing's terms.
And finally, let's connect all of this to the most fundamental aspect, values and credibility. This is about what Taiwan represents.
Taiwan is a vibrant, successful, multi-party democracy. It's a phenomenal contrast to China's authoritarian model. It stands as proof that Chinese-speaking societies can not only survive, but thrive under self-governance, respecting human rights and the rule of law. It's a lighthouse.
And if that lighthouse is extinguished by force, what's the signal that sends to the rest of the world?
It's a crushing psychological blow to every democratic movement on the planet. The message is simple and it's terrifying. Authoritarianism is unstoppable. Might makes right. This kind of victory instantly empowers and encourages other aggressive authoritarian regimes. Russia in Ukraine, Iran in the Middle East. It validates their high-risk aggression, and it accelerates global democratic decline.
And for the U.S., this is the ultimate credibility test. If we fail here, does any ally, anywhere, ever truly trust a U.S. security guarantee again?
No, I don't see how they could. Failure here undermines all future U.S. security commitments. If the U.S. won't stand up for a democratic ally that supplies 90% of the world's most critical technology right at the core of its strategic interests.
Then why should a NATO ally on Russia's border believe their treaty means anything?
Exactly. Losing Taiwan means losing the credibility required to lead the rules-based international order. Period.
Okay, the stakes are astronomical, which means the battle for Taiwan is already underway. It's not some hypothetical future conflict. It's happening right now through non-military means.
That's right. China's path to controlling Taiwan is a two-phase strategy. For Xi Jinping, this is integral to his political legacy. It's the final piece of the Great Rejuvenation.
So let's analyze phase one. Breaking will through what they call gray zone tactics. The goal here is coercion, right? Get Taiwan to unify without firing a single shot, just focusing on psychological despair.
Yes. And these gray zone tactics are aggressive actions just below the threshold of declared war. They're designed to be constant, exhausting, and economically debilitating. It's death by 1,000 cuts.
What specifically are these tactics beyond just sending ships and planes around?
Well, they use expensive cyber warfare, targeting critical infrastructure, government networks, media outlets, anything to cause chaos and sow discord. Then there's legal warfare, where Beijing aggressively distorts UN General Assembly Resolution 27 of 58.
Okay, break that down.
So this resolution just determined who held the UN seat back in 1971. That's it. But Beijing leverages it to claim Taiwan lacks international standing, to delegitimize its participation in global bodies like the World Health Organization.
That's critically insidious, using an old UN procedural vote as legal justification for military threats.
Exactly. And you add to that political warfare massive disinformation campaigns trying to erode domestic trust in Taiwan's government, and economic coercion, like sudden arbitrary bans on Taiwanese agricultural goods that don't violate any actual trade rules.
And all of this is backed up by that relentless, visible military pressure. We have the data on this, and it's alarming.
It is. In just 4 years, China's military incursions into Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, the ADIZ, have jumped from about 1,000 incidents a year to nearly 4,000.
4,000.
It's a massive increase in operational tempo designed to wear down Taiwan's Air Force and just induce fear. And more dangerously, crossings of the median line in the Taiwan Strait, which was this long-respected unofficial buffer, they've surged past 1,000 incidents annually. Taiwan is now routinely surrounded by over a dozen Chinese military vessels. This is all meant to normalize the idea of a blockade, of a constant threat.
So if that constant coercion fails, China moves to phase 2, preparing for conflict. And this is where their sheer military buildup comes into play.
They're undertaking the fastest naval expansion in modern history. China's Navy is already massive, and projections show it will soon be 50% larger than the entire U.S. Navy in terms of vessel count. They're building missiles, expanding shipbuilding, securing supply lines for a long conflict.
And this preparation isn't just external military hardware, right? They're hardening their entire system internally against Western retaliation.
Oh, absolutely. They're stockpiling key commodities, food, energy. They're aggressively reinforcing their financial system to withstand potential sanctions, learning the lessons from Russia's experience, and they're accelerating their nuclear expansion at an unprecedented rate. They're preparing the legal, the financial, and the military scaffolding to execute a large-scale conflict and absorb the blowback.
Okay, so that's the threat. How is Taiwan responding? They're not just sitting back and waiting.
No, not at all. Taiwan is taking this threat very seriously. They've doubled their defense spending over the last decade, and they're pushing to raise its share of GDP from 2.5% to over 3%, with some calls to push it toward 5%.
That's a serious commitment. And strategically, they're adopting the porcupine defense, right? Moving away from those big, expensive platforms.
Yes, the porcupine strategy. It focuses on asymmetric capabilities. The goal is to make themselves too prickly, too costly to invade.
So that means, what? Missiles and drones.
Thousands of smaller, cheaper, harder to neutralize assets, high-mobility anti-ship cruise missiles, advanced drone systems for surveillance and for strike, distributed short-range air defenses. They want to ensure that even if an invasion starts, the cost in lives and material for the CCP is just prohibitively high.
And they're building societal readiness, too, getting the average citizen prepared.
This is so crucial for resilience. They've extended mandatory military service from just 4 months to a full year. And they've implemented this all-society defense resilience program.
What does that involve?
It includes distributing millions of comprehensive preparedness handbooks to households across the island, detailing exactly what to do during a military conflict or a blockade. They're trying to prepare the entire population, physically and psychologically, for severe hardship.
So Taiwan is committed. They're strategizing effectively. But this is where we have to come back to the U.S. Washington passed the Taiwan Enhanced Resilience Act, TRI, authorizing aid. But as we said earlier, the gap between authorization and actual delivery is massive.
This is the implementation gap. Despite strong legislative will in the U.S. Congress, getting weapons and support delivered is just desperately slow. It's a frustrating mix of industrial bottlenecks in the U.S., often prioritizing Ukraine or our own domestic contracts, and crippling bureaucratic complexity.
Let's zoom in on the specific failures in policy delivery. Foreign military sales, or FMS. Why is that so slow for Taiwan?
FMS is notoriously complex. Key programs are constantly delayed, over budget, often because U.S. defense contractors are prioritizing bigger, more profitable contracts, or they just lack the industrial capacity to fulfill all these global orders at once. So, for example, during the previous administration's first term, FMS sales hit a record $18 billion. In the current environment, only a fraction of what's authorized is translating into tangible, delivered hardware. That inconsistency sends a terrible signal.
It signals that the U.S. industrial base itself can't support our own strategic rhetoric.
Exactly. And then you have the Presidential Drawdown Authority, or PDA.
The mechanism we use to quickly get aid to Ukraine from our own stocks. Why isn't that being used at speed for Taiwan?
Well, the use of PDA for Taiwan is significantly hampered by U.S. domestic concerns about replenishing our own stockpiles. Lawmakers and military leadership are worried about depleting our reserves in the Pacific without a guaranteed quick way to replace them.
So that caution, which is a consequence of our stretched industrial base, is slowing down critical aid.
It is. Taiwan needs ammunition now, not in 5 years.
So we have the authorization, but the delivery mechanisms are failing. What do the congressional findings recommend we do right now to close this gap?
They have a clear set of recommendations. First, accelerate delivery. We need a specific, high-priority fast lane list for rapid export approval of essential platforms and ammo. Just cut the red tape immediately for those critical asymmetric assets.
Okay, and what about addressing that core political stability problem? The strategic ambiguity that makes Taiwan so nervous.
They recommend formally codifying the 6 assurances into U.S. federal law.
These have been U.S. policy since the 80s, right?
Yes. The assurances include things like the U.S. won't set a date for ending arms sales, we won't consult with China on those sales. Making them legally binding would offer Taiwan long-term concrete reassurance that U.S. policy isn't going to radically shift based on the whims of a single administration.
And we have to address the lingering economic contradiction. The tariffs, that feeling of exploitation we talked about at the top.
The U.S. has to pivot to signaling economic partnership, not punishment. Passing the dual taxation relief bill is crucial. This bill would resolve the double taxation problem for businesses, which would greatly encourage cross-border investment and prove that the U.S. values Taiwan as a strategic economic partner, not just a chip source.
And finally, the fight against China's legal warfare narrative.
Absolutely. The U.S. State Department needs to proactively and publicly counter China's distortion of UN Resolution 2758. Beijing is weaponizing this to marginalize Taiwan internationally. The U.S. has to aggressively push back to ensure Taiwan retains its space on the world stage, whether it's in the WHO or other bodies. We have to win the narrative fight, too.
We've laid out the danger, the cost, the policy gaps. Now let's fulfill our final mission. Imagining the truly catastrophic scenario. If Taiwan falls, the Chinese Communist Party transitions from a powerful regional actor to a truly global, technology-controlling, and utterly unchallenged superpower.
This is where we need to stop thinking regionally and start thinking about the complete collapse of the Western-led global system. What does that globalized Communist Party superpower, armed with Taiwan's tech and strategic location, actually look like?
Let's start with technology. If they gain control of TSMC, they control 90% of the world's most advanced chips, the digital engine of the planet.
This is what we call the chip autocracy, and it means they can weaponize that control immediately and ruthlessly. We're talking about magnifying their existing digital surveillance tactics, the kind you see in Xinjiang, where they use high-tech monitoring for absolute control and applying that leverage globally.
How does that weaponization actually work? It's not just about selling chips, it's about control.
Right. The CCP could enforce a debilitating chip blockade on any nation or company that crosses its political lines. This goes way beyond trade. They could deny crucial software updates required to keep complex chips running. They could withhold access to the next generation of production tools.
Or they could just refuse to sell the high-end chips needed for AI or financial infrastructure.
Exactly. If you support Tibet, if you host a dissident, if your university criticizes Beijing, your access to future technology could just vanish.
Which means a total loss of technological sovereignty for the U.S. and its allies.
Completely. Think about it. Every advanced U.S. weapon system, all AI research in Silicon Valley, even basic secure military communications, they would all become fundamentally reliant on supply chain decisions made in Beijing.
That's terrifying. They could slow down production.
Or introduce subtle, undetectable flaws into chips that are destined for U.S. defense systems. The U.S.'s technological advantage would evaporate overnight. The entire global economy held hostage by a single politically motivated entity.
Okay, moving from the tech choke point to the physical trade choke point.
All right.
With Taiwan under their control, the CCP dictates terms across Asia's busiest shipping lanes.
They gain the ability to wield the global trade gun. We've already seen them engage in what's called hostage diplomacy, right?
The arbitrary detentions of Canadian citizens in response to the Meng Wanzhou case.
Right. Now magnify that capability exponentially.
If they can do that now, how much worse does the economic blackmail get with Taiwan's strategic location?
They could impose devastating instant economic damage on any nation. They could block key shipping routes through the Taiwan Strait, one of the most trafficked maritime lanes in the world, under the pretense of security or customs disputes. They could seize commercial cargo arbitrarily.
So no one would be safe from political blackmail.
Yeah.
German automakers, banks in London, tech startups.
No U.S. ally, no company. You criticize Beijing, and your entire supply chain for the next quarter is seized in the South China Sea.
So they wouldn't even need missiles for a lot of battles. They would just use economic starvation.
Exactly. And that trade leverage would extend to international institutions, compelling them to pass rules and set standards favorable to Beijing. They would control the flow of goods and the flow of information around those goods. It's a level of global economic power never before seen.
Okay, military expansion. We established Taiwan as the unsinkable carrier. If China controls it, that's the end of U.S. military hegemony in the Western Pacific.
It is. China's military reach extends freely across the broad Pacific. This drastically changes the map. So where does the U.S. defense line retreat to?
It would have to retreat past the Philippines, past the core of the Japanese islands. We'd be relying almost solely on our bases in Guam.
That's the strategic shift. It's no longer about projecting power. It becomes about purely continental defense. And it makes any confrontation exponentially more expensive. The U.S. would have to divert astronomical funds, likely trillions, just to restructure its defense architecture, simply to protect Guam, Hawaii, and the West Coast.
The long-term costs of that strategic retreat would be nearly incalculable.
The strategic advantage China gains from controlling Taiwan is the single greatest shift in global military balance since World War II. It's not just a regional advantage, it's an erasure of a global military advantage the U.S. has relied on for generations.
And this brings us to the final, and maybe most chilling consequence, ideological expansion.
Taiwan's fall validates the CCP's authoritarian model. It proves, in their eyes, that it's superior and more effective than democracy. This victory accelerates global democratic decline.
We saw how ruthless they were silencing dissent in Hong Kong with the national security law. What if that chilling effect is applied internationally, using the power of the chip autocracy and the global trade gun?
That is the ultimate nightmare. The judicial crushing and complete silencing we saw in Hong Kong gets scaled up onto the international stage. China would use its massive economic and technological leverage to enforce global self-censorship.
Give us some specific scenarios. How does this look on a practical, everyday level?
Okay, so Hollywood studios, terrified of losing access to the Chinese market, which is now amplified by their control of tech, they wouldn't dare make a film that criticizes Beijing or depicts Taiwan favorably. U.S. universities would face pressure to silence professors who criticize human rights abuses, threatening research funding or access to vital tech components. International NGOs would lose funding or face legal retaliation if they publish reports critical of the CCP.
So the CCP essentially exports its authoritarian norms worldwide, dictating what can be said, researched, and published.
Absolutely. It's a final trial for Western democratic values. Criticism of Beijing would be marginalized, eliminated, or self-censored globally just due to the immediate, crushing fear of economic and technological retribution. The unconstrained superpower that emerges wouldn't just control territory, it would control thought, commerce, and future technology.
So to summarize our deep dive today, the story of Taiwan is far, far from being a simple regional dispute.
It is the final, fragile defense line preventing the CCP from transitioning its regional expansion into true global dominance. Losing Taiwan means simultaneously losing the global economic chip engine that drives the 21st century.
The Pacific shield that protects decades of U.S. strategic advantage.
And the credibility cornerstone upon which all U.S. alliances rest.
The risks are profound, and they are measurable. From a potential $10 trillion global recession that dwarfs previous crises, to the complete reshaping of the global military balance and the acceleration of global democratic decline.
The anxiety we talked about at the start, it's not hype. It's a fully justified response to the facts on the ground.
So what's our final provocative thought for everyone to mull over after this very heavy session?
Here it is. If the economic and security costs of losing Taiwan are this astronomically high $10 trillion, the end of regional security, the rise of a technology-controlling autocracy, the question for every country isn't, should we help Taiwan?
But rather,
can we possibly afford not to help Taiwan preserve the global system we all currently rely on? The cost of inaction might be the most expensive bill ever rendered.
A heavy thought indeed, but a necessary one to process. Thank you for diving deep with us into this crucial discussion.
If you want more in-depth conversational analysis like this, be sure to subscribe to Sip and Talk wherever you get your shows.
And if you need something to lighten your mood after all this talk of economic collapse and global autocracy, go check out our old friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickey to Life, for some fun travel vlogs and memes. We highly recommend it.
We'll see you next time.